when John Cena became the face of the WWE, when stars like Batista, Randy Orton, Edge, and Brock Lesnar became icons, when The Undertaker was reincarnated as the Dead Man, while Kane took off his mask and gave everyone nightmares, when Edge stole Matt Hardy's girlfriend, while Rey Mysterio and Eddie Guerrero fought over the custody of Dominic, when Chris Benoit reached the peak of the wrestling world and then erased his legacy forever on one dark day in 2007. The Ruthless Aggression Era is widely considered as one of the hottest eras in WWE history. As stars like The Rock and Austin departed, a stacked roster with legends like The Undertaker, Triple H, and Shawn Michaels, along with hungry newcomers, shocking moments, and controversial storylines, injected fresh blood into wrestling and ushered in a new era. So let's take a trip down memory lane and revisit the entire history of the Ruthless Aggression Era, from its origins in 2002, the insanity of 2005, the dark chapter of 2007, all the way to its end in 2009. The year 2002 changed everything for WWE. The logo changed, the name changed, and with it, the entire structure of the company changed too. After the failed Invasion storyline, and with a roster bloated beyond control, Vince McMahon made the bold decision of splitting the talent across two separate brands. Raw and SmackDown would operate as rival shows. It was a gamble that would define the next decade. But with the top names of the previous years like Rock and Austin leaving, WWE needed someone to fill that void immediately. What they got was the next big thing. His name was Brock Lesnar. From the moment he debuted, it was clear this wasn't an ordinary rookie. Within weeks, he was destroying legends. In just 5 months, Lesnar defeated The Rock to become WWE Champion. He beat Hulk Hogan and The Undertaker in the same calendar year. No rookie had ever done what Brock Lesnar did in 2002. By the time the year ended, Lesnar was the new standard. But while SmackDown had found its future, Raw was about to get something it hadn't seen in 4 years. Shawn Michaels had been gone since 1998. A broken back, personal demons, and years of uncertainty had kept one of the greatest performers of all time far away from the ring. Most people assumed they'd never see him compete again. But then, in the summer of 2002, HBK returned. Within weeks, his former best friend Triple H turned on him, setting up one of the most personal feuds in years. At SummerSlam, in an unsanctioned street fight, Michaels proved the doubters wrong with one of the greatest comeback performances in wrestling history. The feud continued through the year, anchoring Raw's main event scene and giving the brand a shot in the arm it desperately needed. But while those two were main eventing Raw every week, something quietly extraordinary was happening in the mid-card of SmackDown. Kurt Angle, Chris Benoit, Eddie Guerrero, Edge, Rey Mysterio, and Chavo Guerrero, collectively known as the SmackDown Six, were delivering classics on free television every single week. It was some of the best wrestling the company had produced in years, and most casual fans didn't even realize it. But 2002 wasn't just about established talent, it was the year the next generation arrived. John Cena debuted by answering Kurt Angle's open challenge. Randy Orton arrived as a cocky, spoilt brat. Batista walked in looking like a monster carved out of stone. Rey Mysterio brought a style the company had never seen on this level. These men would go on to carry WWE for the next decade. Away from the ring, though, the year had a darker side too. The infamous plane ride from hell, a flight home from a UK tour that descended into chaos involving public intoxication and real-life confrontations. It was a reminder that behind the spectacle, the locker room was a complicated and sometimes dangerous place. But nothing was more complicated in 2002 than WWE's attempts to recreate past glories. When Hulk Hogan, Kevin Nash, and Scott Hall returned to reform the NWO, the reaction was electric. The problem was WWE had no idea what to do with them once they got there. The group that had revolutionized wrestling in 1996 arrived in 2002 and immediately felt out of place. They were heels in name only, lacking the menace and chaos that had made them iconic. Hogan himself sensed it first. The crowd wasn't booing him. So at WrestleMania 18 against The Rock, he leaned into it. The iconic red and yellow colors of Hulkamania returned, and with Hogan turning face, Hall and Nash had no place on the card, and quickly made their exit. Then came Scott Steiner, a man who had been a monster in WCW, but arrived in WWE clearly diminished. His matches were painful to watch. His feuds went nowhere. The company had tried twice to recapture old magic of the 90s, and failed twice. But that failure carried an important lesson. The future of WWE wasn't in the past. It was in the young men debuting every week, hungry, athletic, and ready to build something new. And in 2002, that future had only just begun. But if 2002 was the year WWE planted seeds for the future, 2003 was the year the weeds took over. On Raw, Triple H had won the World Heavyweight Championship and showed absolutely no signs of letting it go. What followed became known as the Reign of Terror, a suffocating grip on the top of the card that lasted the better part of 2 years. To tighten that grip, Triple H formed Evolution, a 4-man faction built around himself: Ric Flair, Randy Orton, and Batista. Together, they dominated Raw every single week. Anyone who got close to the title was brushed aside. Scott Steiner, Goldberg, Booker T, nobody could survive the politics of the game. The fans could see what was happening. Raw in 2003 often felt like a show designed to protect one man rather than build new ones. But on the SmackDown side, something completely different was going on. Kurt Angle and Brock Lesnar were at war, and it was glorious. Angle had the amateur credentials and the championship. Lesnar had the size, the youth, and the hunger. Their rivalry played out across the entire year in matches that ranged from excellent to genuinely historic. At WrestleMania 19, Lesnar won the WWE title, despite almost ending his career with a botched shooting star press. Then, on a regular episode of SmackDown, the two had a 60-minute Iron Man match that many still consider one of the greatest matches ever given away on free television. And while those two were redefining what wrestling could look like, Raw was turning into a horror show. Kane had spent years hiding behind a mask. In the summer of 2003, Triple H forced him to remove it, and just as Kane took off his mask, nobody on the Red brand was safe. RVD, Eric Bischoff, Linda McMahon, Kane attacked everyone. He was a man stripped of his identity, angrier, and more unhinged than ever before. Kane channeled that rage into a feud with Shane McMahon that took them through increasingly violent encounters. But the defining moment of Kane's year came after his feud against Shane. At Survivor Series, Kane interfered in the Buried Alive match between The Undertaker and Vince McMahon, turning on his own brother and burying him under 6 feet of dirt. The Undertaker disappeared from television entirely. For months, the uncertainty lingered. But while Kane was burning bridges on Raw, the biggest legends in WWE history were preparing for one final collision. Stone Cold Steve Austin and The Rock had defined the Attitude Era together. They had main-evented WrestleMania twice. They had given fans some of the most electric moments in wrestling history. And at WrestleMania 19 in Seattle, they did it one more time. The Rock won. And when the match ended, it marked the end of an era. With the legends stepping aside, the path was clearing for a new generation, and 2003 gave them room to breathe. John Cena was developing a personality on SmackDown that connected with audiences in ways nobody had predicted. Randy Orton was being carefully positioned inside Evolution, learning from Ric Flair every week and slowly becoming the cocky, dangerous legend killer that would eventually define his career. Batista was growing too, quietly building strength and presence every time he appeared on screen. On the Blue brand, Vince McMahon removed Stephanie from her role as SmackDown general manager in a storyline that felt uncomfortably personal. With Stephanie out of the picture, Paul Heyman replaced her as the GM of SmackDown, and that decision changed everything. Heyman immediately understood what SmackDown needed. Under his watch, SmackDown became the clear superior show, a place where wrestling mattered and the booking made sense. And as 2003 closed, the gap between the two brands had never felt wider. The future was coming, but before it truly arrived, 2004 would see two men finally realize their dream. For years, Chris Benoit and Eddie Guerrero had been told that they would never be world champions. 2004 made liars out of everyone who believed that. At the Royal Rumble, Benoit entered at number 1 and outlasted 29 other men to earn his WrestleMania shot. Meanwhile, on SmackDown, Eddie Guerrero fought his way to a championship opportunity at No Way Out and shocked the entire wrestling world when he beat Brock Lesnar to become WWE Champion. For a man who had battled addiction, personal demons, and years of being overlooked, the moment Eddie jumped into the crowd and celebrated with his people was one of the most genuinely emotional scenes in WWE history. Then, at WrestleMania 20, Benoit made Triple H tap out in the middle of Madison Square Garden to win the World Heavyweight Championship. As the show came to an end, Eddie came to the ring, and the two best friends stood together holding their titles. But not every story in 2004 was about underdogs triumphing. Some were about villains rising. John Bradshaw Layfield had spent years as a brawling mid-card tag team wrestler. Then he rebranded as JBL, a loud, arrogant, self-proclaimed wrestling god, and somehow it worked. He defeated Eddie Guerrero for the WWE title in June and held it for nearly a year, generating nuclear heat everywhere he went. But while JBL was becoming the evil tyrant of SmackDown, John Cena was quietly becoming the hero of the Blue brand. He won the United States Championship and defended it with a confidence that suggested the main event wasn't far away. On the Raw side, Randy Orton had spent 2003 learning inside Evolution. By 2004, he was ready to graduate. At SummerSlam, he defeated Chris Benoit to become the youngest world heavyweight champion in WWE history at just 24 years old. It should have been the beginning of a long reign. Instead, Triple H, furious that his protege had outgrown him, kicked Orton out of Evolution the very next night and took the title back within a month. And then there were the two men who left, Brock Lesnar and Goldberg. Two of the most physically imposing performers WWE had ever seen, both departing after WrestleMania 20 in a match that the entire audience turned on the moment it began, having learned beforehand that neither man was staying. What should have been a dream match became a disaster, with both men visibly going through the motions while fans rained down boos. Stone Cold Steve Austin was the special referee, and even he couldn't save it. Their exits left a significant hole, but also cleared the way for the others to step up, and into that space stepped a dead man. The Undertaker had disappeared in late 2003, buried alive by his own brother. When he returned at WrestleMania 20, the biker character was gone. The hat, the coat, the gong, the darkness. It was all back. The dead man had returned, and the reaction from the Madison Square Garden crowd was unlike anything else that night. He dismantled Kane in minutes, took his streak to 12-0, and then spent the rest of 2004 dominating SmackDown. Even JBL's title felt secondary whenever The Undertaker walked through the curtain. Away from the major storylines, 2004 had plenty of other moments worth remembering. Shawn Michaels and Triple H finally settled their war. The first ever Taboo Tuesday gave fans the chance to vote on match stipulations. Stars like Batista, Kurt Angle, Rey Mysterio, John Cena, and Edge were ready to ascend to the next level. The puzzle pieces were in place, the roster was ready, and now it was time for the hottest year in WWE history. A year that saw Edge steal Matt Hardy's girlfriend, when Randy Orton set The Undertaker on fire, when JBL made Cena bleed buckets, when Vince tore both his quads, when Batista gave Triple H the thumbs down, when HBK made Hogan look like a fool in front of the world, when Ray and Eddie fought over the custody of Dominic, when ECW came back from the dead, when two new champions were crowned on the grandest stage of them all, and these are just some of the things that happened in the unforgettable year of 2005. From a creative standpoint, 2005 was the year WWE finally moved on from the Attitude Era and embraced ruthless aggression. The company had spent 3 years rebuilding after losing icons like The Rock and Austin. But rather than dwelling on the past, in 2005, WWE bet everything on creating new stars. The year had controversial storylines, personal angles, and two men in particular would rise to the top and change WWE for years to come. But what made 2005 so iconic? What were the feuds, the controversies, and the real-life drama that shaped WWE's future? Let's turn back the clock and revisit the hottest year in WWE history. Our story starts in January at the Royal Rumble. 30 men would compete to earn their ticket to the WrestleMania main event, and the stage was set for WWE's future. The final two competitors were Batista and John Cena, both men being groomed as the next big thing in WWE. The match was supposed to end with Batista eliminating Cena and earning his WrestleMania title shot. Instead, both men tumbled over the top rope and hit the floor simultaneously in one of the most infamous botches in WWE history. Referees panicked, producers scrambled, and then, in a moment that became legendary for its absurdity, Vince McMahon stormed to the ring to restart the match. As the boss slid under the ropes, he legitimately tore both of his quads. Unable to stand, McMahon was forced to sit in the ring barking orders while his legs dangled beneath him. The visual was unintentionally hilarious, but the show had to go on. Batista won the restarted match as planned. But the real drama came in the following weeks as Triple H tried desperately to manipulate his protege. Heading into 2005, Triple H's reign of terror had suffocated Raw for over 2 years. Despite delivering some memorable matches, the game's stranglehold on the World Heavyweight Championship had grown stale. Meanwhile, his Evolution stablemate Batista was showing signs of independence, and fans were ready to see the animal break free. The game attempted to convince Batista to challenge JBL for the WWE Championship on SmackDown instead, allowing Evolution to control both brands. The Puppet Master pulled every string he could, but on the February 21st episode of Raw, Batista finally snapped. He gave Triple H the thumbs down, powerbombed him through a table, and completed his babyface turn. The stage was set for WrestleMania 21, where after 2 years of dominance, Triple H's reign of terror came to an end at the hands of his protege. The animal was unleashed, and he had taken over as the king of the jungle. But while Batista's rebellion dominated Raw's main event scene, another Evolution member was stuck in a fight against the dead that had changed the landscape of WrestleMania forever. After being kicked out of Evolution, Randy Orton spent months floundering in the mid-card scene on Raw. But heading into WrestleMania 21, Orton needed to make a statement. And what better way to make a statement than by conquering the dead? The Legend Killer set his sights on the biggest legend of them all, The Undertaker and his undefeated WrestleMania streak. Before this, the streak hadn't always been marketed as the legendary spectacle it would later become. Before this, it was just a number. But heading into WrestleMania 21, WWE made the conscious decision to transform Undertaker's record into a Mania spectacle. Orton was the perfect opponent for this new direction. Young, cocky, and desperate to cement his legacy, the Legend Killer believed he could accomplish what no one else had. He mocked Taker's legacy, RKO'd his own girlfriend, attacked other WWE legends, and at WrestleMania 21 in Los Angeles, Taker and Orton collided in a match that would set the template for every other streak match that followed. For over 14 minutes, Orton threw everything he had at the dead man. But in the end, The Undertaker stood tall and kept his WrestleMania legacy intact. Most rivalries would have ended there, but Orton's obsession with destroying The Undertaker had only just begun. After a brief hiatus due to a shoulder injury, Orton returned to WWE and was drafted to SmackDown, putting him on the same brand as the Dead Man. What followed was a descent into madness that showcased just how unhinged the Legend Killer could become. Orton wasn't content with simply beating The Undertaker. He wanted to end him once and for all. The rivalry escalated with each passing week. Orton and his father attacked the Dead Man at every opportunity. They tricked him at SummerSlam. They mocked him with retirement fund DVDs. They presented him with a casket containing a mannequin. And at No Mercy in October, the Ortons defeated Undertaker in a handicap casket match, stuffing the Phenom inside and sealing him in. But that wasn't enough for Randy Orton. In one of the most shocking moments of the year, Orton drilled holes into the casket and then set it on fire with the Undertaker locked inside. For weeks, Orton reveled in his apparent victory, convinced he had finally ended the Undertaker's career. But the Dead Man doesn't die easily. Throughout the fall, supernatural occurrences began haunting Orton. The Undertaker returned from the grave, more powerful and vengeful than ever, tormenting Orton with mind games that drove the Legend Killer to the brink of a breakdown. The rivalry culminated at Armageddon inside Hell in a cell, where The Undertaker finally put the feud to rest with a definitive victory. The story of Orton's overconfidence and the Dead Man's resilience was one of the hottest feuds of the year. But more importantly, it cemented The Undertaker's WrestleMania streak as one of the most important narratives in WWE history. But while Batista was conquering Raw and Orton was battling the Supernatural on SmackDown, another megastar was rising who would define WWE for the next decade. John Cena had spent the majority of 2004 climbing the ranks on SmackDown and connecting with younger audiences with his rapper gimmick in ways WWE hadn't seen in years. By early 2005, it was clear that Cena had outgrown the United States Championship. He was ready for the main event, and WWE was ready to give him the ball. At WrestleMania 21, Cena challenged JBL for the WWE Championship, and when the referee's hand hit the mat for the 3 count, a new era had officially begun. But Cena's coronation came with an unexpected problem. Just 6 weeks after winning the title, WWE made a shocking decision. On June 6th, John Cena was drafted from SmackDown to Raw, taking the WWE Championship with him. The move was designed to position Cena as the face of the company on WWE's flagship show. Instead, it exposed him to a much harsher spotlight. On Raw, Cena's character began to shift. The edgy rapper persona was softened into a more superhero-like babyface. He started wearing colorful shirts and promoting hustle, loyalty, and respect. Kids loved it, but the hardcore fans hated it. Throughout the summer and fall, Cena defended his title against Chris Jericho and Kurt Angle in excellent matches, but the crowd reactions kept growing hostile. By the time Unforgiven rolled around in September, Cena was being loudly booed despite being the champion babyface. The company had created a star, but they hadn't anticipated the backlash. But while Cena continued his ascent on Raw, his future biggest rival was stuck in a love triangle that would take personal feuds to a new level. Matt Hardy and Lita had been dating since 1999. By early 2005, Hardy was out with a knee injury and suggested that his girlfriend travel with their old friend Edge on the road to keep her company. Edge was married at the time and considered a trusted friend. Matt thought she'd be safe, but he was wrong. Edge and Lita began an affair behind Hardy's back. When Edge's wife discovered incriminating phone calls between the two, she informed Matt about the relationship. Heartbroken and furious, Hardy broke up with Lita and began dropping hints on his website about what had happened. The situation exploded into public view, and WWE's immediate response was to fire Matt Hardy. However, the decision backfired spectacularly. Fans rallied behind Hardy, They brought signs to WWE events, they chanted his name, and the heat was so intense that WWE had no choice but to bring Hardy back and turn the real-life drama into a storyline. On July 11th, Matt Hardy returned to Raw and attacked Edge backstage, screaming that he was going to make his life a living hell. The worked shoots blurred reality and fiction in uncomfortable ways as both men referenced the affair openly on television. Lita called Matt obsessive. Edge claimed the situation was ruining his life. Matt admitted he'd been shopping for wedding rings before everything fell apart. The feud culminated in a series of matches at SummerSlam, Unforgiven, and Raw, with Edge winning the majority of them. In the end, Hardy lost a loser leaves Raw ladder match and was sent to SmackDown. Edge and Lita remained together on Raw, and their real-life relationship gave rise to one of the most hated couples in WWE history. But if the Edge and Lita situation was personal, nothing could prepare fans for the soap opera that was about to unfold on SmackDown. Eddie Guerrero and Rey Mysterio were best friends. They'd won the WWE Tag Team Championships together earlier in the year. But Eddie, ever the master manipulator, had become consumed by jealousy. Rey kept beating him. Rey kept overshadowing him. And Eddie couldn't accept being second best. The breaking point came when Eddie brutally assaulted Rey and ripped his mask off on live television. What followed was a character transformation that showcased Eddie's incredible range as a performer. The Latino Heat became unhinged, desperate, and willing to do anything to destroy his former friend. At Judgment Day, Eddie beat up Rey with a steel chair. But that wasn't enough for Eddie. Eddie had a secret, one he'd been holding over Rey's head for weeks. Eddie finally revealed the truth that Rey Mysterio wasn't Dominic's biological father. Eddie claimed that years ago, when Rey couldn't have children, Eddie had given his son to the Mysterio family. Now, he wanted Dominic back. Custody papers were presented, social workers got involved, and at SummerSlam, the two competed in a ladder match where the winner would gain legal custody of the child. For 15 minutes, Eddie and Rey delivered another excellent performance while a terrified Dominic watched from ringside. Vicky Guerrero, Eddie's real-life wife, ultimately betrayed her husband by pushing over the ladder, allowing Rey to grab the custody papers and keep his son. While the storyline was ridiculous on paper, but Eddie and Rey's performances were so committed, so emotionally raw, that fans couldn't look away. It remains one of the most talked about angles in WWE history. But while some storylines in 2005 pushed the boundaries of personal vendetta, others were based on pure wrestling excellence. For years, people had called Shawn Michaels the greatest wrestler in WWE history, and Kurt Angle was determined to prove that statement was a lie. Over the following weeks, Angle embarked on a mission to recreate and surpass all of Michaels' greatest moments. He made fun of HBK's iconic ladder match win. He brought back Marty Jannetty to mock the Rockers. He even dressed up as Michaels himself, complete with chaps, sensational sherry, and a hilarious rendition of HBK's theme song. But when all the games were over, at WrestleMania 21, the two finally collided in what many consider the greatest match in WrestleMania history. For 27 minutes, Angle and Michaels delivered a 5-star classic that justified every ounce of hype. Angle won with the ankle lock, but both men proved they belonged in the conversation as all-time greats. But following his loss to Angle, Shawn Michaels found himself in another dream match scenario, this one decades in the making. Hulk Hogan, the immortal icon of the 1980s, had returned to WWE for a brief run. The company wasted no time booking Hogan and Michaels in a tag team match, which naturally led to the two agreeing to face each other one-on-one. Behind the scenes, however, tensions were brewing. The plan had been for Michaels and Hogan to wrestle a series of matches, with each man getting a victory. But Hogan, never one to willingly lose his spot, politicked his way into only agreeing to a single match at SummerSlam. And of course, the Hulkster would be going over. Shawn Michaels was furious. He'd spent years working his way back to the top of the WWE. But now Hogan, who hadn't been a full-time performer in years, was refusing to put him over. So Michaels decided to make a statement in the most Shawn Michaels way possible. At SummerSlam on August 21st, HBK delivered one of the most ridiculous performances in wrestling history, which was a masterclass in pettiness. For 20 minutes, Michaels turned the match into a comedy routine by overselling every single move Hogan threw at him. A simple shove sent Michaels spinning through the air. A boot to the face caused him to flip completely over. The Toronto crowd ate it up, laughing and cheering as Michaels made a mockery of Hogan's offense. Hogan got the pinfall victory as agreed, but everyone watching knew the truth. Shawn Michaels had won the war. The match became an instant classic for all the wrong reasons, and Hogan never worked with Michaels again. But apart from these memorable matches and rivalries, 2005 also had other historic moments that defined the year. On June 12th, WWE presented ECW One Night Stand, a pay-per-view dedicated to the extreme wrestling promotion that had closed its doors 4 years earlier. The Hammerstein Ballroom in New York City became a time machine as legends like Sabu, Sandman, and Tommy Dreamer returned to recapture the magic. The show was so successful that it planted the seeds for ECW's eventual revival as a WWE brand. But just as the year seemed to be reaching its peak, tragedy struck. On November 13th, Eddie Guerrero was found unresponsive in his Minneapolis hotel room. The 38-year-old had suffered a massive heart attack brought on by years of substance abuse that had taken its toll on his body. His nephew Chavo discovered him, but it was too late. One of the most beloved performers in wrestling history was gone. The wrestling world mourned. Tribute shows replaced Raw and SmackDown. Wrestlers broke down in tears on live television. Eddie's death cast a shadow over the final months of 2005, reminding everyone that behind the larger-than-life characters, real human lives hung in the balance. By the time 2005 ended, WWE had accomplished what many thought impossible. They'd created 2 legit main event stars in Batista and John Cena. They'd elevated the Undertaker's streak into a WrestleMania tradition. They'd pushed the boundaries of reality with controversial storylines. And they'd delivered some of the greatest matches in company history. The pieces were in place for WWE's next chapter, but the memories of 2005, both triumphant and tragic, would echo through the company for years to come. It truly was one of the hottest years in WWE history. But if 2005 was the year WWE created its next megastars, 2006 was the year those stars collided. And no collision was more constant, more heated, or more defining than the one between John Cena and Edge. Edge had spent years being one of the most talented performers on the roster without ever being trusted with the top spot. Then, in January at New Year's Revolution, he changed that himself. Cena had just survived a brutal Elimination Chamber match, battered and barely standing, when Edge sprinted to the ring and cashed in his Money in the Bank contract. Moments later, Edge was WWE Champion. The two would spend the majority of 2006 trading the title back and forth in a rivalry that carried Raw throughout the year. Cena was the superhero the kids adored and the smart crowds increasingly booed. Edge was the calculated, manipulative heel who always seemed to find a way to survive. Their chemistry was undeniable, whether it was standard singles matches, TLC bouts, or chaotic multi-man situations. Every time these two shared a ring, the stakes felt real. But while Cena and Edge were defining Raw, SmackDown had its own dramatic story unfolding. Batista had been the dominant world champion heading into the year until a tricep injury forced him to vacate the title in January. Into that vacuum stepped Rey Mysterio. He had entered the Royal Rumble at number 2 and won the whole thing, dedicating his run to his late best friend Eddie Guerrero, who had passed away just 2 months earlier. At WrestleMania 22, Rey defeated both Kurt Angle and Randy Orton in a triple threat to become World Heavyweight Champion, fulfilling his promise to Eddie in front of the entire world. But what followed was a reign that never got the support it deserved from the people booking it. Vince McMahon never fully committed to Rey as the top guy, and the result was a champion who kept losing constantly and eventually dropped the title to King Booker. With the main event scene shifting on both brands, Raw needed something to capture the audience's imagination. It got exactly that in May when Triple H returned to help Shawn Michaels fight off the McMahons and the Spirit Squad. DX was back. The reunited duo spent the summer tormenting Vince and Shane McMahon in a series of increasingly outrageous segments and an insane battle inside Hell in a Cell. Around the same time, WWE was making an even bigger swing by reviving ECW as a third brand. The groundwork had been laid by the success of ECW One Night Stand in 2005. The return started perfectly when Rob Van Dam cashed in his Money in the Bank contract on Cena at One Night Stand in front of a rabid ECW crowd and won the WWE title to a reaction that shook the building. For one night, it felt like the real ECW was back. Then the weekly show started and reality set in fast. Because the ECW that appeared on television every week wasn't the outlaw, dangerous promotion fans remembered. It was a watered-down third brand with corporate polish all over it. But away from the ECW disappointment, Raw had other stories worth following. Randy Orton and Edge formed Rated RKO. Umaga arrived as a terrifying, undefeated monster and bulldozed through opponent after opponent on his way toward an inevitable collision with Cena. And after years of carrying the women's division on their backs, both Trish Stratus and Lita walked away from WWE within months of each other. Away from the headline stories, 2006 had other moments worth remembering as Jeff Hardy returned to WWE after a short stint in TNA. Mr. Kennedy had a breakthrough year on SmackDown, feuding against The Undertaker and positioning himself as a future main event star. And at December to Dismember, WWE produced a show so badly received that Paul Heyman left the company shortly after. It was a rough ending to what had otherwise been a year full of memorable moments. But if you thought the ending of 2006 was dark, 2007 was about to give us the darkest year in WWE history. WWE in 2007 was off to a hot start. You had John Cena versus Shawn Michaels, Batista versus The Undertaker, and WrestleMania broke pay-per-view records with Trump shaving Vince bald. It seemed like the company had finally found its footing in the post-Attitude Era landscape, but then everything went downhill. What followed was an unprecedented cascade of real-world tragedies, career-ending scandals, devastating injuries, intense media scrutiny, exploding limousines, and government investigations that all culminated in the darkest period WWE had ever experienced. While the product on television still remained decent with stars like Cena, Batista, Edge, and Randy Orton leading the charge, behind the scenes, WWE was fighting for its very survival as controversies mounted week after week. So what exactly made 2007 the darkest year in WWE history? What were the tragedies, scandals, and disasters that almost caused the wrestling industry to crumble completely? And how did a company that started the year with such promise find itself desperately trying to rebuild its reputation from the ground up? Let's find out. Let's start by talking about the darkest tragedy in WWE history that changed everything. The weekend of June 24, 2007 began like any other pay-per-view weekend for WWE. WWE Vengeance was set to take place in Houston, and one of the most anticipated matches on the card was Chris Benoit defending his ECW Championship against the up-and-coming CM Punk. But when showtime arrived, Benoit was nowhere to be found. Initially, WWE officials were told that Benoit couldn't make it due to a family emergency involving carbon monoxide poisoning at his home. While the news was concerning, these things happened occasionally in wrestling, and the show had to go on. Johnny Nitro was quickly substituted into the match, defeating CM Punk to become the new ECW champion. Throughout the night, fans and fellow wrestlers kept wondering where their beloved technical wrestler had gone. But behind the scenes, a much darker reality was unfolding. WWE officials couldn't reach Benoit by phone, and as hours passed without contact, panic began to set in. The company was already dealing with the fallout from Vince McMahon's exploding limousine segment, which was supposed to culminate in a special 3-hour tribute episode of Raw the following night. Instead, the planned McMahon Memorial Show was quickly scrapped when news broke that would change everything. On Monday afternoon, just hours before Raw was set to air, police discovered the bodies of Chris Benoit, his wife Nancy, and their 7-year-old son Daniel at their home in Fayetteville, Georgia. Initial reports suggested a possible family tragedy, perhaps the carbon monoxide poisoning that had been mentioned earlier. In a state of shock and confusion, WWE made the decision to transform their planned McMahon tribute into a Chris Benoit memorial show. For 3 hours, WWE superstars sat with tears in their eyes, sharing memories of Benoit and showcasing his greatest matches. They showed his Royal Rumble victory, his WrestleMania triumph, and countless technical masterpieces that had made him one of the most respected wrestlers in the world. Edge broke down on camera. William Regal spoke about Benoit's dedication to the craft. It was a touching tribute to a man they all believed had died tragically alongside his family. But as the show progressed, more details began emerging from the police investigation. This wasn't a family tragedy or an accident, it was something darker. Chris Benoit had killed his wife Nancy, his son Daniel, and then taken his own life. The revelation hit WWE like a nuclear bomb. Vince McMahon, who had been dealing with his fictional death storyline, now faced a very real crisis that threatened to destroy his company's reputation forever. The next night on ECW, a visibly shaken McMahon appeared on television to address what had become apparent. With one of the angriest expressions ever seen on his face, he promised that Chris Benoit's name would never be mentioned on WWE programming again. But the damage was already done. The wrestling world had just broadcast a 3-hour tribute to a man who had committed one of the most heinous crimes imaginable, and mainstream media was about to pounce on the industry like never before. Within hours of the Benoit tragedy being revealed, every major news outlet in America descended upon pro wrestling like vultures. CNN, Fox News, ESPN, and countless other networks launched into wrestling with a vengeance. The narrative painted WWE and pro wrestling as a cesspool of steroid abuse and violence. When wrestlers like Kevin Nash appeared on Fox News to provide context and defend their industry, they were met with hostile interrogation rather than genuine discussion. The media's approach was ruthless and often dishonest. Anchors who had never watched a wrestling match in their lives suddenly became experts on the industry and painted every wrestler as a ticking time bomb waiting to explode. What made the media assault particularly devastating was its timing. Wrestling had already been dealing with public perception problems since the end of the Attitude Era, and this gave critics the ammunition they needed to paint the entire industry as irredeemably corrupt. But the media firestorm was just the beginning of WWE's problems, because as reporters dug deeper into the wrestling world, they uncovered a scandal that would forever change how WWE superstars looked and performed. As if the media scrutiny following the Benoit tragedy wasn't devastating enough, WWE was about to face an even more immediate crisis that would gut their roster and expose the widespread use of performance-enhancing drugs throughout the industry. The investigation had actually begun months earlier, in February 2007, when Sports Illustrated started looking into a potential steroid distribution network operating out of Florida. What started as a routine investigation quickly expanded into something much larger when major wrestling names began appearing in the records. Kurt Angle was the first major star implicated, though he denied any wrongdoing. But Angle was just the tip of the iceberg. On March 19, 2007, Sports Illustrated dropped a bombshell article revealing that multiple wrestlers had received prescriptions from Dr. David Wilbert in Arizona between November 2004 and April 2005. The initial list included names like Eddie Guerrero, Rey Mysterio, Randy Orton, Edge, and Gregory Helms. Edge's response was particularly damaging to WWE's credibility. Rather than denying the allegations, he admitted to using steroids after his neck injury, explaining that they were prescribed to help the bones grow back around the screws and plates in his neck. The situation exploded on August 30, 2007, when the New York Daily News published a comprehensive list of wrestlers who had received steroids and other drugs from internet doctors. 12 current WWE wrestlers were named, and the fallout was catastrophic. Chavo Guerrero, Shane Helms, Randy Orton, John Morrison, Mr. Kennedy, Funaki, Charlie Haas, Umaga, William Regal, Edge, and several others were suspended for violating WWE's wellness policy. The timing couldn't have been worse. WWE was already dealing with the Benoit aftermath and intense media scrutiny. Now they were losing another dozen wrestlers to suspensions. Storylines had to be rewritten overnight. Umaga lost the Intercontinental Championship to Jeff Hardy, John Morrison was stripped of the ECW title and lost it to CM Punk, and countless other angles were abruptly terminated. But perhaps most heartbreaking was Mr. Kennedy's fall from grace. Kennedy had been positioned as WWE's next big star, chosen to be revealed as Vince McMahon's illegitimate son in what was supposed to be a career-defining storyline. Instead, his suspension ended his push, and the angle was quickly rewritten with Hornswoggle taking his place. The scandal didn't stop there. Congress got involved and demanded records from WWE dating back to 1998. TNA was also asked to provide information, making this an industry-wide crisis. But even as WWE reeled from suspensions and media scrutiny, their problems were about to get worse. As if the Benoit tragedy and steroids scandal weren't devastating enough for WWE's roster, 2007 also became a year where it seemed like every major star was cursed to suffer career-threatening injuries at the worst possible moments. The injury plague began early in the year when Triple H suffered a devastating quad tear that would sideline him for 7 months. The timing was horrible since Triple H was being planned for a high-profile WrestleMania rematch with John Cena, forcing WWE to completely rewrite their biggest show of the year at the last minute. Shawn Michaels stepped into Triple H's spot, creating one of the best matches in WrestleMania history with Cena. But losing HBK's original opponent meant further reshuffling of an already complicated card. The domino effect of a single injury was already causing problems, but this was just the beginning of WWE's medical nightmare. The Undertaker, who had been having a career renaissance with his world title run and matches against Batista, went down with a torn bicep that forced him out of action for months. Edge, fresh off winning the World Heavyweight Championship and positioned as SmackDown's top heel, suffered a pectoral injury that forced him to vacate the title he had just won. Bobby Lashley, who had been built as ECW's franchise player, also suffered injuries that disrupted his momentum. But perhaps the most devastating blow came when John Cena, WWE's undisputed top star and face of the company, tore his pectoral muscle in October. The injury bug was so severe that by the summer of 2007, WWE's main event scene had been reduced to Batista, Rey Mysterio, Randy Orton, and King Booker. When you combine the injuries with the suspensions, WWE was left with a roster so thin that they were forced to put the World Heavyweight Championship on the Great Khali, not because he was the best choice, but because he was one of the only credible heels left standing. But WWE's crisis went beyond just immediate injuries and suspensions. These mounting disasters forced the company to make changes that would reshape the wrestling industry forever. The mounting crises of 2007 forced WWE into a desperate period that would fundamentally alter the direction of pro wrestling forever. What emerged was a complete philosophical shift that transformed WWE from the edgy, controversial shows that had defined the Attitude Era into something entirely different. The most immediate change came in response to the Benoit tragedy and the growing understanding of CTE in the company. Unprotected chair shots to the head, which had been a staple of hardcore wrestling for decades, were immediately banned following the discovery that Benoit's brain showed damage equivalent to an 87-year-old Alzheimer's patient. The company also implemented stricter concussion protocols and enhanced their wellness policy, which had originally been created after Eddie Guerrero's death. More frequent testing, stricter penalties, and increased medical oversight became the new standard as WWE tried to prove to critics that they were serious about performer safety. But the most visible change was WWE's gradual shift toward family-friendly programming. This wasn't entirely due to the 2007 controversies. There were financial incentives to pursuing a PG rating that would attract more mainstream advertisers and sponsors. However, the events of 2007 accelerated this transition dramatically. Network executives and advertisers who might have overlooked wrestling's edgier content were now actively distancing themselves from anything associated with WWE's violence and controversy. The move toward PG programming was evident in small changes at first. Hornswoggle began appearing in more child-friendly segments, blood was gradually reduced, and storylines became less focused on adult themes. The gritty look of Raw was abandoned, hardcore matches became increasingly rare, and the overall tone shifted from rebellious entertainment to something parents could watch with their children. WWE's decision to go HD in 2008 provided the perfect cover for this transition, but industry insiders knew the real motivation. The company needed to rebuild its reputation from the ground up, and that meant abandoning everything that had made wrestling controversial in the first place. Kelly couldn't do her provocative, extreme expose segments anymore. Storylines became less personal, and the general atmosphere had to become more sanitized. WWE was moving away from the crash TV mentality that had defined their success in the late 1990s toward something that could survive mainstream scrutiny. This shift toward PG programming would define WWE's content for over a decade, fundamentally changing how storylines were written, how characters were developed, and what kinds of matches could be presented. However, even as WWE was implementing these changes to salvage their reputation, 2007 still had more tragedy in store. What had already been the darkest period in WWE history became even more devastating as a cascade of wrestler deaths created an atmosphere of genuine fear. The year saw the deaths of Bam Bam Bigelow and Mike Awesome within a month of each other in early 2007. Bigelow was just 45 years old when he died from a drug overdose, while Awesome was only 42. In March, Bad News Brown and Ernie Ladd died within the same week, creating an eerie pattern that had wrestlers genuinely worried about who might be next. June brought the death of Sherry Martel from a drug overdose. The media used each death as evidence of wrestling's toxic culture, creating a narrative that painted the entire industry as a death trap. August brought yet another tragedy when Bryan Adams, known to fans as Crush, died at age 43 from mixing prescribed medications. Beyond the deaths, WWE was dealing with a host of other problems that would have been major crises in any normal year, but seemed almost minor compared to everything else happening. ECW was on life support after Vince McMahon's comedy championship reign killed whatever credibility the brand had left. The cruiserweight division became such a joke that WWE actually put the title on Hornswoggle. Creative teams were constantly rewriting shows due to suspensions, injuries, and other real-world crises interrupting their storylines. The threat of federal intervention loomed over every decision, making company executives paranoid about every aspect of their operation. Looking back at 2007, it's remarkable that WWE survived at all. Any one of these crises could have ended a smaller company. The combination of all of them should have been fatal. Yet, Vince McMahon and the WWE managed to survive the darkest year in history. But as the calendar turned to 2008, the Ruthless Aggression Era would write a new chapter. When Jeff Hardy finally captured his childhood dream, when John Cena defied medical science and made his epic Royal Rumble return, when The Undertaker chokeslammed Edge to hell, when Randy Orton started kicking people in the head, When Chris Jericho put on a suit and transformed into the best villain WWE had seen in years. When Ric Flair said goodbye. When CM Punk won Money in the Bank. When the two biggest stars of the Ruthless Aggression Era collided in a dream match. And these are just some of the things that happened in the wild year of 2008. When most people think of the greatest years in WWE history, they think of the late 90s or the early 2000s, but WWE in 2008 delivered unforgettable rivalries, shocking returns, and career-defining moments for multiple superstars. New champions were crowned, legends retired, and some of wrestling's greatest feuds unfolded on screens every week. So what made WWE in 2008 so special, yet so underrated? What were the matches, the moments, and the storylines that shaped WWE's future? Let's rewind the clock and relive one of the spiciest years in WWE history. Our story begins at the Royal Rumble. The Undertaker and Shawn Michaels, the final two from the previous year's Rumble, kick off the road to WrestleMania as the first two entrants this year. What follows is a blend of returns, nostalgic moments, and amazing performances from guys like CM Punk, Triple H, and Taker. However, the real show stealer of the night comes at number 30. In October 2007, John Cena suffered a torn pectoral muscle during a match on Raw. The injury was devastating, and initial estimates put his recovery time at 7 months minimum, potentially keeping him out of action until after WrestleMania. But 2008 Cena wasn't a normal human being. This was Super Cena. While most athletes would use an injury like this as an excuse to rest and recover slowly, Cena approached his rehabilitation like a Terminator. Cena was determined to return to the ring as quickly as humanly possible. And when Cena's music hit at number 30, MSG erupted. John Cena stepped through the curtain with a sly smirk on his face. The final moments came down to Cena and the game. For nearly 5 minutes, the two went back and forth before Cena eliminated Triple H and won the Royal Rumble. In another shocking development, Cena would announce that he wasn't going to wait till Mania and instead challenged Orton for the WWE title at No Way Out. Orton would intentionally get himself disqualified and retain the title, leading to a triple threat at Mania between Orton, Cena, and Triple H, where the Viper managed to once again walk out with the gold. But while Orton was dominating Raw, a dark and personal story was brewing on SmackDown. In the summer of 2007, Edge cashed in his Money in the Bank on a weakened Undertaker and became the World Heavyweight Champion. After the Dead Man made his return, the Rated R superstar spent months dodging Taker's wrath. But the Phenom earned his shot by winning the SmackDown Elimination Chamber and punching his ticket to WrestleMania. At WrestleMania 24, The Undertaker defeated Edge to capture the World Heavyweight Championship and extend his undefeated streak to 16 wins. But this wasn't the end of their story. It was only the beginning. Edge had an advantage that most challengers didn't possess. His storyline girlfriend Vickie Guerrero served as SmackDown's general manager, and she was willing to abuse her power in every conceivable way to help her man succeed. In an act of blatant corruption, Vickie banned Taker's Hell's Gate, calling it too dangerous and stripping The Undertaker of the World Heavyweight Championship. At Judgment Day, The Undertaker and Edge battled once more for the vacant championship. Undertaker won the match by countout, but Vickie quickly reminded everyone that titles cannot change hands on a countout. The gold remained vacant, The Undertaker remained frustrated, and Edge continued to smile, knowing the game was rigged in his favor. That brought us to One Night Stand, where WWE decided to settle things once and for all. The match would be a TLC bout, Edge's specialty, a match type synonymous with his name from his legendary encounters with the Hardy Boys and Dudley Boys. For The Undertaker, it was uncharted territory. The Dead Man had competed in Hell in a Cell matches, casket matches, buried alive matches, but never in a TLC match. However, that wasn't the big story here. There was one more stipulation that made the stakes impossibly high. If The Undertaker lost, he would be forced to leave WWE. Edge brought his entire faction to ringside. Every time The Undertaker climbed toward the championship, La Familia dragged him back down. The numbers were too much. Towards the end, Undertaker ascended the ladder, fingertips inches from the gold. Edge, barely conscious, mustered one final burst of energy and shoved the ladder. The Undertaker tumbled backward, falling through 4 tables stacked at ringside in the most terrifying bump of his legendary career. Edge climbed the ladder and retrieved the championship. The Undertaker's career in WWE was over. Edge celebrated with his championship and his allies. Vickie Guerrero gloated from her position of power. And for the first time in years, SmackDown would have to move forward without the Phenom. Of course, this being professional wrestling, The Undertaker's banishment wouldn't last forever. 2 months later, after Edge was caught cheating on Vicky with their wedding planner, she would bring The Undertaker back for a Hell in a Cell match at SummerSlam. The dead man destroyed Edge at SummerSlam and chokeslammed him to hell in one of the most satisfying revenge moments in WWE history. The Edge and Taker feud carried SmackDown for months, and during that magical summer of 2008, they gave us some of the best segments and matches in WWE history. But while Edge and Taker dominated the first half of the year, a certain charismatic enigma's pursuit of the WWE Championship would define the second half. For years, Jeff Hardy had been dancing on the edge of greatness. He'd won Tag Team Gold with his brother Matt, he'd captured the Intercontinental Championship multiple times, he'd stolen shows with death-defying stunts that left fans speechless. But the one prize that had always eluded him was the WWE Championship. In 2008, that would finally change, though the road to glory would be paved with setbacks, near misses, and heartbreak. The year started promisingly when Hardy challenged Randy Orton for the WWE Championship at the Royal Rumble. For a brief second, it looked like Hardy might capture his first world title, but then Orton reversed the twist of fate into an RKO, and the dream died. However, after being drafted to SmackDown in June, Hardy found himself thrust into the main event scene on the blue brand. He competed in the championship scramble match at Unforgiven, coming within seconds of winning the gold before time expired. Then, at No Mercy, he challenged Triple H one-on-one, landing a swanton bomb that should have sealed the victory, only for the game to roll him up for a quick pinfall. The frustration was mounting. Every time Hardy reached for the brass ring, it slipped through his fingers. At Survivor Series, Hardy was scheduled to challenge for the WWE Championship, but he was found unconscious in his hotel and written out of the match. Edge replaced him and captured the title. It seemed like yet another setback, another cruel twist of fate preventing Hardy from achieving his dream. But fans didn't give up on him. They kept chanting his name. They kept pushing him towards his dream. And it all led to December 14th, 2008, Armageddon. This was Jeff's last chance. In the closing moments, Triple H hit a pedigree on Edge. But before he could capitalize, Jeff delivered a swanton bomb onto Edge. Triple H rolled out of the ring. Hardy covered Edge. And 3 seconds later, the arena exploded. After years of coming up short, after months of near misses, Jeff Hardy was the WWE Champion. The image of Jeff standing atop the Armageddon set, championship held high, got etched in wrestling history. The underdog, the risk taker, the daredevil who'd put his body on the line for over a decade, had finally reached the mountaintop. But while Jeff was climbing his way to the top on SmackDown, Raw was about to see the biggest dream match of the Ruthless Aggression Era. Ever since they both debuted in 2002, people had wondered when John Cena and Batista would finally clash. Both men had followed similar paths, but they'd been kept apart till now. Cena was on Raw, while Batista was on SmackDown. But that changed in 2008, when the Animal got drafted to Raw. On the July 21st episode of Raw, Batista was facing CM Punk for the World Heavyweight Championship when chaos erupted. JBL ran into the ring, trying to escape a vengeful John Cena. When Cena swung at JBL, he ducked, and Batista caught the punch instead. The tension was palpable. WWE seized the opportunity and announced that Cena and Batista would face each other at SummerSlam. It was billed as 6 years in the making, the first ever singles match between two of WWE's biggest stars. These were the two men who had carried WWE through the mid-2000s. These were the faces of the Ruthless Aggression Era. And finally, they were going to settle who was truly the better man. At SummerSlam on August 17th in Indianapolis, the two delivered a physical war. Cena hit the AA, Batista hit the Batista bomb. Both men refused to stay down. Batista caught a high-flying Cena in midair and hit a modified Batista bomb, but Cena kicked out once again. Finally, Batista went into overdrive, hoisting Cena up for another devastating powerbomb, and this time got the 3 count. The Animal had proven himself 3 seconds better than John Cena on this historic night. But there was a price to pay for this blockbuster encounter. During the match, Cena suffered a legit neck injury that would sideline him for 3 months. But while Cena and Batista were settling their score, another rivalry was reaching its peak, one that would be remembered as the greatest feud WWE had produced in years. Chris Jericho versus Shawn Michaels, hero versus idol, truth versus perception. And by the summer of 2008, it had transformed into something far darker and more personal than anyone could have anticipated. The seeds were planted months earlier when Jericho served as special guest referee for the Batista versus Shawn Michaels match at Backlash. In that contest, Michaels faked a knee injury to gain an advantage, ultimately hitting sweet chin music on Batista to steal the victory. Jericho was disgusted. This was his hero, the man he'd idolized his entire career, resorting to lies and manipulation. The fans still cheered for Michaels anyway, which only infuriated Jericho more. On an episode of Raw, Jericho invited Michaels onto his talk show segment, The Highlight Reel, only to grab Michaels and drive his head face first into the Geritron 5000. He traded in his leather jacket and jeans for tailored suits. He spoke with precision and confidence. He became a villain who believed he was the hero of his own story. At the Great American Bash in July, the two met in what became one of the bloodiest matches of the year. Jericho systematically targeted Michaels' injured eye, beating him so severely that the match had to be stopped by referee decision. Michaels disappeared from television for a month. Then, at SummerSlam, he returned with his wife Rebecca to announce his retirement. The eye injury was too severe, he explained. His career was over. But Jericho interrupted the emotional moment, demanding that Michaels admit it was all Jericho's doing. Words were exchanged, tempers flared, and when Jericho swung at Michaels, HBK ducked, and Rebecca took the punch. Jericho had crossed a line that shouldn't be crossed. Michaels' retirement was forgotten. He was coming back for revenge. At Unforgiven, they met in an unsanctioned match. For 25 minutes, they destroyed each other in what became one of the most violent encounters of the modern era. Michaels battered Jericho so badly that referees were forced to stop the match. The Heartbreak Kid had his revenge. But Jericho's night wasn't over. Later that evening, after CM Punk was attacked and unable to compete in the World Heavyweight Championship Scramble match, Jericho took his place, and despite being beaten within an inch of his life earlier, he won the championship. In a single night, Chris Jericho had gone from the lowest point of his career to the highest. The feud culminated at No Mercy in October with a ladder match for the World Heavyweight Championship. Jericho retrieved the championship, proving once and for all what he'd been saying all along. He wasn't Shawn Michaels. He was better. The Wrestling Observer would later name their ladder match as Match of the Year. Jericho won Wrestler of the Year, and the feud itself was recognized as Feud of the Year. Both Michaels and Jericho have since called it some of the best work of their careers. But while these major storylines dominated the headlines, 2008 was also defined by several other memorable moments that shaped WWE's landscape. Like CM Punk winning the Money in the Bank briefcase and cashing in on Edge to become World Heavyweight Champion, only for Randy Orton to punt him in the head and make him vacate the title. The year also saw the emotional WrestleMania match between HBK and Ric Flair when Shawn Michaels kicked the Nature Boy into retirement. Santino was comedic gold, William Regal won King of the Ring, and Big Show got punched by Floyd Mayweather. When the calendar flipped to 2009, WWE had fundamentally changed. The transition to the PG era was complete. But 2008 proved that WWE could still tell compelling stories, create new stars, and deliver unforgettable moments even with the PG-era restrictions. From John Cena defying medical science to The Undertaker vs. Edge, to Jeff Hardy finally capturing his childhood dream, to Chris Jericho vs. Shawn Michaels, 2008 was a year that was emotional as well as unpredictable. Looking back now, it stands as one of the most underrated years in WWE history, a transitional period that successfully bridged the gap between the Ruthless Aggression and the PG era, building wrestling's future while honoring its past. But as we entered 2009, it was time to say goodbye to the Ruthless Aggression era. When Randy Orton became a menace to society, when The Undertaker and Shawn Michaels gave us the greatest match in WrestleMania history, when Big Show chokeslammed John Cena to the Shadow Realm, when Jeff Hardy's sudden exit broke everybody's heart, when Chris Jericho unmasked Rey Mysterio, when CM Punk became the most hated man on SmackDown. And these are just some of the things that happened during the crazy year of 2009. Most wrestling fans hate this year because they remember 2009 as the year WWE fully transitioned into the PG era. However, despite the PG restrictions, 2009 was filled with personal rivalries, shocking title changes, and career-defining performances that fans still rewatch to this day. So what made 2009 so special yet so underrated? What were the matches, feuds, and moments that defined WWE's dive in the PG era? Let's rewind the clock and relive the chaos of WWE in 2009. By the end of 2008, Randy Orton was already an established main event star. He'd won world championships, feuded with legends like The Undertaker, and the Legend Killer was one of the top stars in the company. However, in 2009, Randy Orton went full-on psycho mode and terrorized the entire wrestling world. His first target was none other than Vince McMahon. After a heated standoff, the Viper straight up kicked the chairman in the skull and established himself as the company's top heel. Randy then went on to win the 2009 Royal Rumble, punching his ticket to the main event of WrestleMania. WrestleMania. But Orton wasn't done with the McMahon family. When Vince's daughter Stephanie brought back her brother Shane to deal with Orton, Randy ended up punting him in the skull too. But he didn't stop there either. He even RKO'd Stephanie and stood tall over her with a cold, emotionless stare. This wasn't just business anymore. This was personal. And there was one man who couldn't let it slide: Triple H. Triple H and Stephanie were married in real life. Heading into WrestleMania, the game wasn't just defending his championship. He was defending his family. Triple H invaded Orton's home and attacked him ruthlessly. But the Viper got his revenge days later when he handcuffed Triple H and kissed Stephanie right in front of him. The feud built to a boiling point heading into WrestleMania 25. Triple H promised he would end Randy once and for all on the grandest stage of them all, while Orton wanted revenge for Triple H kicking him out of Evolution 5 years ago. After almost 25 minutes of back-and-forth action, Triple H beat Orton and retained the WWE Championship. Orton's era of terror was over, or so everyone thought. But while Randy was making the McMahon's life a living hell on Raw, another iconic rivalry was gearing up for its final chapter. John Cena had entered 2009 as the World Heavyweight Champion after returning from injury and dethroning Chris Jericho. However, if Edge is on the same roster as Cena, you know Cena's life won't be peaceful. But here's the thing. In early 2009, Edge and Cena weren't even on the same roster. But the Rated R superstar still managed to finesse the system one more time. At No Way Out, Edge lost the WWE Championship inside the Elimination Chamber after being quickly eliminated by Jeff Hardy. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief thinking his reign of terror was finally over. But the master manipulator wasn't going away so easily. Later in the night, Edge attacked Kofi Kingston while he was making his entrance and took his spot in the World Championship Elimination Chamber match. When the night was over, Edge had lost a world title and won another within a span of 3 hours. The stage was set for another epic clash between Cena and Edge. It looked like the most iconic rivalry of the Ruthless Aggression Era was finally going to get its WrestleMania spotlight. Except there was a twist. WWE inserted Big Show into the match, turning it into a triple threat. Show had been caught in a love triangle with Edge and Vicky on SmackDown, and he wasn't about to let Cena and Edge settle things without him. At WrestleMania, the three collided in a hard-hitting affair. But in the end, it was Cena who overcame the odds, capturing his 5th World Heavyweight Championship and bringing the title back to Raw. However, Edge wasn't finished yet. He invoked his rematch clause at Backlash, and this time it was a last-man-standing match. Cena fought valiantly, but towards the end, Big Show appeared out of nowhere and chokeslammed Cena through a spotlight. Cena laid motionless, and Edge stole the victory. The World Heavyweight Championship was returning to SmackDown once again, but Edge's celebration was about to be cut short by a certain charismatic enigma. Jeff Hardy had ended 2008 on top of the world, finally capturing his childhood dream when he won the WWE Championship at Armageddon. But 2009 would prove that staying on top was far harder than getting there. Hardy's first major challenger was none other than Edge. The Rated R superstar wanted to reclaim what he believed was rightfully his, and at the Royal Rumble, he got his chance. In a shocking turn of events, Hardy lost the championship when his own brother Matt interfered and cost him the match. The betrayal was gut-wrenching. The Hardy brothers had been fan favorites for over a decade. They'd won tag team gold together, stolen shows with ladder matches, and shared countless memorable moments. But jealousy had been eating away at Matt. He was tired of living in his younger brother's shadow, tired of watching Jeff get all the glory while he fought for scraps. At the Royal Rumble, that jealousy exploded. Their brother versus brother feud consumed the first few months of the year. Matt claimed Jeff was selfish, reckless, and undeserving of his success. Jeff just wanted to understand why his own flesh and blood would stab him in the back. The Hardys collided multiple times throughout the spring. Matt got the win at WrestleMania, but Jeff got his revenge at Backlash. However, Jeff couldn't focus solely on his brother. He still had championship aspirations, and Edge was now holding the gold after defeating Cena. At Judgment Day, Hardy challenged Edge for the title, and just when it looked like Jeff might recapture the gold, Matt Hardy interfered again. The assist allowed Edge to retain, leaving Jeff frustrated once more. Finally, at Extreme Rules, everything came together. Jeff defeated Edge in a brutal ladder match, his specialty, to win the big gold. The charismatic enigma was back on top, but his celebration lasted all of about 30 seconds. CM Punk's music hit. The Second City Saint walked down the ramp with his Money in the Bank briefcase, the same one he'd won at WrestleMania months earlier. Hardy was exhausted, broken, barely able to stand. Punk cashed in and within minutes became the new World Heavyweight Champion. Jeff's moment of glory had been ripped away in the cruelest fashion possible, and this led to the most heated rivalry of the summer on SmackDown. CM Punk was the straight-edge superstar who preached about living clean, about avoiding drugs and alcohol. Jeff Hardy had a well-documented history with substance issues. Punk used this against him, constantly berating Hardy for his past mistakes, calling him a failure and a bad role model for kids. They traded wins throughout the summer, and finally, at SummerSlam, they met in a tables, ladders, and chairs match with the World Heavyweight Championship on the line. In a shocking outcome, CM Punk defeated Jeff Hardy to retain his title in what many considered Hardy's signature match type. But the feud didn't end there. SmackDown wasn't big enough for the two of them. Punk and Hardy faced off once again on an episode of SmackDown in a loser leaves WWE steel cage match. Punk won the match, forcing the charismatic enigma to leave the company. Fans were devastated, kids were crying, and Jeff's glorious run had come to an abrupt end. The backstage reason was that Hardy needed time to heal from injuries, but the real story was darker. WWE chose not to renew his contract when it expired a few months later due to continuing substance abuse issues. Jeff Hardy's meteoric 2009 had ended not with glory, but with a painful goodbye. Had Jeff stayed with the company, he could have main-evented WrestleManias and even become the face of WWE. To this day, it remains one of the biggest what-ifs in wrestling history. But before we get too deep into the summer chaos, we need to rewind back to WrestleMania 25 when two legends created magic. The Undertaker's WrestleMania streak stood at 16 wins. For nearly 2 decades, nobody had been able to defeat the dead man at the Showcase of Immortals. Legends had tried and failed. Champions had fallen before him. The streak had become as iconic as WrestleMania itself. But now The Undertaker faced his most dangerous challenge yet, the Heartbreak Kid, Shawn Michaels. This wasn't just another match. This was symbolic. Heaven versus hell. The showstopper versus the phenom. It was a dream encounter between two of the greatest performers in WWE history, and somehow it exceeded every expectation. Leading up to Mania, HBK had outsmarted the dead man at every step. Taker had never defeated Michaels one-on-one in a big match situation. It looked like HBK had the psychological advantage. But when it's the night of WrestleMania, The Undertaker becomes something absolutely mythical. For 30 minutes, the two legends delivered perfection. Near falls had the crowd on their feet. Signature moves were countered. Finishers were kicked out of. At one point, The Undertaker attempted a dive to the outside, but the move went horribly wrong. He came dangerously close to landing directly on his head in what could have been a career-ending situation. Michaels nearly won by countout as the dead man struggled to make it back into the ring. Michaels hit sweet chin music flush, but Undertaker kicked out. Taker hit the tombstone, but it wasn't enough. Every 2 count felt like it could be the one to end the streak. The Houston crowd was losing their minds with every passing moment. In the closing sequence, Michaels attempted a moonsault, but The Undertaker caught him midair and drove him down with a thunderous tombstone piledriver. As Michaels lay motionless in the ring, The Undertaker slowly rose to his feet. Both men had left everything they had out there. The match received universal praise from critics and fans alike. It set an impossible standard for every Mania match that followed. Even today, many fans consider it the greatest WrestleMania match of all time. But while Taker and HBK were stealing the show, Randy Orton was trying to literally end careers. Remember when we thought the age of Orton was over after Triple H beat Randy at WrestleMania? Well, that didn't last long. At Backlash, just weeks after losing the championship, Orton found his way back to the top. In a 6-man tag team match, a pre-match stipulation stated that if Orton pinned Triple H, he'd become champion. And that's exactly what happened. The Viper was back on top. The age of Orton was upon us once again. But Randy's second reign would be short-lived. At Extreme Rules, Batista defeated him to capture the championship. However, 09 Orton wasn't going to stay down so easily. If he couldn't beat you in a match, he would simply put you out of action. Randy and Legacy attacked Batista, broke his arm, and forced him to vacate the title. With no champion, WWE held a fatal 4-way match, and once again, Randy Orton emerged victorious. This third reign would prove to be his longest of the year. Orton successfully defended against Triple H, finally putting their feud to rest in a brutal 3 stages of hell match. But as one rivalry ended, another was about to heat up. John Cena had moved on from his battles with Edge and Big Show, and now he had his sights set squarely on the WWE Championship. His feud with Orton dominated the second half of 2009. At SummerSlam in August, Orton used every dirty trick in the book and walked out as champion once again. Finally, at Breaking Point in September, Cena defeated Randy Orton in an I Quit match to capture the WWE Championship, but Orton invoked his rematch clause immediately. At Hell in a Cell inside the demonic structure, Orton regained the championship in controversial fashion. The rivalry reached its epic conclusion at Bragging Rights in October with a 60-minute Iron Man match. For a full hour, Cena and Orton battled back and forth, trading falls and punishment. At one point, Randy even tried to blow up Cena with pyro, but the GOAT won't stay down. In the final moments, with the score tied, Cena locked Orton in the STF, and the Viper had no choice but to tap out. John Cena stood tall as champion, and their legendary 2009 rivalry had finally reached its conclusion. But 2009 wasn't just about main event rivalries. Throughout the year, other compelling stories unfolded. DX reunited and had an epic feud with Legacy that included a Hell in a Cell match, a submissions match, and HBK and Triple H even had an epic TLC match against Jericho. Speaking of TLC, the December pay-per-view delivered one of the biggest shocks of the year. Sheamus, a relative newcomer who'd only been on the main roster for a few months, defeated John Cena in a tables match to become WWE Champion. The year also saw The Undertaker reclaim the World Heavyweight Championship, CM Punk's transformation into one of the company's top heels, Chris Jericho and Rey Mysterio's entertaining feud over the IC title, and Kofi Kingston's brief run in the main event scene before Randy thought he was stupid. While fans remained divided about 2009, the year proved that WWE could still deliver great stories, shocking moments, and unforgettable matches even with the PG restrictions. In fact, this would end up being WWE's hottest year before the magic of 2016. And if you want to revisit the amazing year of 2016 in WWE, check out this video next.